Everybody, welcome back. We have been answering your questions and we're going to jump right in and answer some more. And I think that we're starting out with a question for me.
Yes, and this question comes in from Jennifer, and Jennifer asks, what is your recommendation about including a resume with the Common App? Should it always be done or only if the student has something to add to what is in the activities section? Does the selectivity of the school to which the student is applying factor into this decision?
Okay, so my recommendation is no, it should not always be done. I think if a student has accurately and adequately completed the Common App activities section of the Common application, then they're fine and they don't need to
Right.
submit something extra. Um, I would say that the tendency can be, I want to submit a lot of extra, the more selective the school goes, I becomes, or sorry, the more selective the school, the more people want to throw a ton of stuff at them. And
Right.
actually, and ironically, that's probably the time to pull back. So,
Yes.
um, I really do feel like if it's not new information, if you're just rehashing what is already in the activities section, then I would not submit a resume. If you really could not fit everything that you did onto the Common App activities section, an alternative to including a resume would be to add the additional stuff into the additional information section. If it is that you are doing some very unique things that at a glance are not pretty clear, right? I know what
Mhm.
editor-in-chief of the newspaper does. I don't really need a long explanation for that, but perhaps you have done your own separate project that's totally unrelated to anything at school, and the 150 characters you get to describe it on the Common App just really isn't allowing you to help the admissions committee understand what you are actually doing. That might be an example of it might fit into the additional information section also, or it might be something that you write your essay about, or barring that, maybe it is better kind of laid out in a resume. The key thing I would say is there are some schools that do not offer you the opportunity to upload a resume. They don't encourage you to submit one. And I think for those, you definitely don't want to submit an essay. If right on the application, they give you the opportunity to upload an essay, I mean, a resume, again, I really do feel like if you're not adding anything new, I'm not sure I would take that opportunity. But if they offer you the opportunity, I don't think it hurts if you upload a resume. I just don't think it's necessary.
Right.
There are some schools where they do ask you to include a resume. Obviously, for those schools, you want to include it. The last thing I will say on this front, as a former admissions officer who read a lot of files every day, the more um, precisely and succinctly you can lay the information out in a highly readable, consumable way, the better. I am a big fan of listing grades in which you participated versus years. If you list years, I have to do math. Don't make your admissions officer do math. If I have to think, now wait, they were a freshman and was it 2020, 2021 that they were a freshman, or were they a sophomore? You've already lost me. I don't have time to do math. They want to know hours per week and weeks per year. If you are omitting that information, it's also not super useful, right? So the resume is meant to help you see at a glance what a student was involved in and what that entailed and what their role, specifically their role, right? You also don't want a lot of definitions of things. You want to understand the student's role in the thing. In my mind, the resume should not look, my son's resume should look nothing like my resume. I have a working
Right.
resume. He has a high school activities resume. They're very different things. And so just when you think about resumes, those are some of the things I would think about. Definitely not required for every student.
Perfect.
All right, Shannon, this question comes from Cameron. I've heard your team reference making sure you have one or more financial safety schools on your list. What exactly is a financial safety? How do I know if the colleges on my son's list make the cut? Great question.
Yeah, and I'd say there's no technical precise definition of financial safety. In my mind, a financial safety school is one that you know you can afford for sure. So you go to the college's website, you see They have their cost of attendance listed, and you look at your budget and you say, yeah, I can swing this out of pocket.
Right.
That would definitely be considered a financial safety. I think you could also arguably include schools that have a very defined numeric merit scholarship policy where they spell it out on their website. If you get X GPA or Y SAT score, you get Z scholarship.
Yes.
That is guaranteed. You know that. Definitely not every school does that. Some are much more, they want to give themselves more wiggle room in terms of who they award scholarships to, but when they spell it out on their website and you know for sure that your child meets those qualifications, and with the amount of that merit scholarship, now that school is within your price range, I think I would call that a financial safety. Also, potentially, if you filled out the net price calculator for the school and therefore you know it's not 100% guaranteed, but is usually accurate as long as the information you put into the calculator is accurate, you know what need-based financial aid they're going to give you. And with that need-based financial aid, you can afford any remainder out of pocket. I think I would call that a financial safety school. So again, essentially one you know you can afford either totally out of pocket or with guaranteed merit scholarships or the financial aid that they have indicated they're going to offer you on the net price calculator. I think I would call any school that falls into any of those categories a financial safety. And I think the other piece of it that's very important, you also have to be able to get into that school and be very sure that none of that helps if you can afford this school, but you probably won't get in, that's not a safety, right, of any kind. So it needs to be an academic safety, your grades, test scores are kind of well above average. Very probably you will get in and you can afford it as well. That's what you need at least one of on your child's list. Again, if not multiple. So, how do you know if the schools on your child's list make the cut? Take a look. Can I afford, what's their price? Can I afford it out of pocket? No. Well, are there guaranteed merit scholarships that my child qualifies for? No. Have I filled out the net price calculator and I see the financial aid they're going to give me? Can I afford the school with that financial aid? No. Then it is not a financial
not
safety.
A financial safety.
You got to do a little bit more research and find one or more schools that fit that bill and that your son can almost positively get into.
Right. And a couple of other things that I would know, and Shannon, I literally know of one school where they lay it out super clearly. The kind of like, if you have this, you get this. Alabama does a brilliant job of that. Are there a lot more that do that? I don't know of any others, actually.
Yeah, Alabama, I would say, is the one that springs to mind that does it really well. It tends to be more the case, more certain at the public universities, more so than the private schools. I have almost very rarely see it at the private schools. Public schools tend to give you a better idea, though I would say it was more the case when schools were not test optional.
Yes.
I think when they would often spell out this test score gets you this scholarship. Without the test scores, it has become more complicated. And I think fewer schools are making such a guarantee because they've got to figure things out on their end a little bit more.
Right.
And they don't want to make those guarantees.
And actually that highlights something that I have been saying. I wish I wasn't, but for some of these larger state schools, we have a theme in today's show, I guess, around these. But it's when their system and the way that they do admissions is not set up to do it without a test score, right? When their system is around rigor of curriculum, grades, and test scores, it's more difficult for them to pivot, which is not to say that they're not pivoting, just that it might be easier to qualify for those merit scholarships if you've got the score. I can think of a few schools where I've seen them sort of spell it out, but then if you don't have the scores, then they want you to write an essay, and it's clearly trickier. It's a trickier process. And so while I am not at all an advocate of test, in fact, I would love to tell every listener to the show, you definitely do not have to test. It always depends because I don't know where you're applying. And if you have state schools in your sites and schools that are going to offer merit money, the best thing you could probably do if you can test safely would
Yep,
probably be to test. So anyway, wish it was
absolutely.
something different.
I know. And oh, that actually leads, I think, exactly into
Oh,
our
it
next
does,
question
doesn't it?
from Maria. Maria says, my daughter, who is a sophomore, is not a great test taker, and we are considering not having her do any standardized tests at all, given how many schools are test optional. Do you think this is a problem?
Well, I just to kind of continue on with what I was just saying. On the one hand, no, I don't think it is. I think that for some students, testing is just never going to be a strength. They could spend a lot of time and quite honestly, a lot of money trying to prep to do well on those tests, and they will still not be good or not be in line with what they are capable of doing or what they do in the classroom. So I think that the answer is sure, you could forego the testing. And if you can, I think that's great. If you're applying to the UCs, guess what? They're not even going to look at scores, so they will do you zero good there. Unfortunately, it's tough to get into the UCs these days. And so if you're going to have financial safeties, if you're going to have academic safeties, you might need to look beyond that. There are a couple of states, Georgia and Florida, right now, where their state institutions require test scores. That is not a choice that the schools themselves are making. Those are decided by governmental bodies that they are not controlling. And so I know sometimes if you feel strongly that test scores should not be required, the tendency is to blame the school, but it's not really the school's fault. They would like to be test optional. To the best of my knowledge, based on what I see them saying. In that case, it's out of their hands. But if you live in Florida and you have some wonderful institutions in Florida and they are very reasonably priced, it may be that you really want to test because that's going to be required there. Same for Georgia. If you know that you're probably not going to look at larger state schools, or you're going to look at your in-state school where your child is pretty qualified and they're not requiring test scores for anything that's important, then you can get away with that. And there are many, many schools that are test optional. The one caveat I would say is that if your daughter is a sophomore, we just don't know what policies will look like by the time she's a senior.
Right.
What all indications are that test optional is here to stay it's always been around, but the huge uptake of test optional is probably here to stay because a lot of colleges, if other colleges are test optional and they decide to require them again, well, guess what? Then they're going to lose those applicants who are saying, you're the only school that's requiring me to test. I'm just not going to apply, right? So I think that's the tricky part is, are some schools going to come back and require testing? Probably not, but I can't say for sure today because I don't have a crystal ball. But if I was a betting woman, I would say it's probably a pretty safe bet that you could go without testing if you're not interested in any of those schools that I just mentioned.
Yep.
All right, Shannon, this question comes to us from Diego. Diego asks, or says, oh, my favorite, I heard that.
Uh-oh.
I know it. Oh man. And Diego, yes, this is a quintessential. I heard that statement and
Yes.
question because what follows is totally not true. Okay. I heard that if we don't claim our son as a dependent on our tax return, he could apply for financial aid without us. Diego, if that was true, it sounds too good to be true, right? That's the other
Sure
thing.
does.
If it sounds too good to be true, it's probably because it's not. But is this accurate? My son is a high school junior, so we'll be applying for college next year. And we're wondering if we shouldn't claim him when we file our taxes this year.
No, very short answer. No, that will not help him to be independent. There are very specific qualifications for financial aid independency. The student being married, having kids of their own, being in foster care, under legal guardianship, being in the military. Other than that, schools are generally going to require parental information. So go ahead and claim him and pay less taxes.
All right. And with that, we're out. Don't forget, we're here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific.